The new debit card still gleamed on the counter as my son paced the kitchen, fists clenched. As I stirred my tea, I didn't look up. Just let the silence stretch. While the edge of the card caught the light, it felt colder than steel. The same name he used to forge was now nowhere to be found. That's when he finally read it. Just my name. No joint access. No control. I didn't cut him off out of anger. I cut him out to save what was left of me. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee cooling beside her as she scrolled through her bank account on her laptop. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft light across the cluttered countertops. She had always been cautious with money, a trait instilled in her during the decades spent managing her family's finances. But today, something about the usual calm of reviewing her accounts felt different, a nagging suspicion tugging at her gut. She clicked into the transactions list for the past few weeks. At first, the numbers blurred together: utilities, groceries, the occasional medical bill. But then a pattern began to form. Several withdrawals stood out, each one slightly larger than expected. Some were at local stores she didn't recognize, while others were transfers to accounts that didn't seem familiar. She felt her pulse quicken as her eyes narrowed, her hands gripping the edge of the laptop. What the hell is this? Her fingers hovered over the mouse, clicking on one of the suspicious transactions, a charge at a high-end electronics store. Evelyn frowned. She didn't buy anything like that. She clicked through a few more, each one more bewildering than the last. A dinner at a restaurant she'd never visited, a gift shop purchase for something she didn't need, and then the one that stopped her cold. A withdrawal for a personal loan, David's name attached to the memo. Evelyn sat back, her breath catching in her chest. Her first instinct was disbelief, but the more she looked, the more it made sense. Her son, David. He had always been a bit reckless with money, but this was beyond the occasional slip-up. She could feel her heart pounding as her mind raced. He's been using my debit card without my permission. The realization struck her like a slap to the face. She felt sick, betrayed. This wasn't just a mistake, or a one-time lapse in judgment. David had been systematically using her finances for his own needs, without a second thought for the trust she had extended to him. For years, she had put his needs above her own, ensuring he was always comfortable. But this was a violation of everything they'd ever shared. The more Evelyn thought about it, the angrier she became. It was as if he had been quietly siphoning away the hard-earned peace she had spent her life building. She could hear his voice echoing in her mind. "You owe me, Mom. I'm your only son." It was the same line he had used for years whenever he needed help. Whenever he expected her to give without question. Her eyes wandered to the window, the view of the quiet neighborhood doing little to ease the storm building inside her. The betrayal felt like a weight on her chest, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. She had always believed that family was supposed to be a safe place, a bond of trust that couldn't be broken. But David had shattered that idea. A soft knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. Maggie's voice, warm and comforting, drifted through the wood. "Eve? You okay in there?" Evelyn hadn't realized how tight her shoulders had become, how tense her whole body felt. She closed the laptop and stood, the muscles in her neck protesting as she moved. Maggie's presence was a balm on her simmering anger. She opened the door and Maggie stepped inside, eyes immediately flicking to the unreadable expression on Evelyn's face. "What's going on?" Maggie asked gently, her concern written all over her face. Evelyn didn't need to say anything. She could tell Maggie already knew something was wrong. She handed her the laptop, pointing to the screen. Maggie leaned in, her brow furrowing as she skimmed the list of transactions. When her eyes met Evelyn's again, They were full of understanding. That son of a... Maggie started, then paused, taking a deep breath. Eve, you've got to do something. You can't just let him keep doing this. Evelyn looked at her best friend, her shoulders sagging as the weight of the situation fully hit her. Maggie was right. It was time to stop being passive, to stop putting others' needs above her own. She had been afraid to draw a line with David, afraid of what it would mean for their relationship. But now, there was no question. She couldn't let him take advantage of her anymore. I'm going to change my bank details, Evelyn said, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. Maggie nodded, her eyes filled with both empathy and support. You've got every right to, Eve. He'll have to learn the hard way. Evelyn took a deep breath, her fingers clenching at her sides. She could already feel the weight of the conversation that was coming, the confrontation. David wouldn't like this, and she knew it. But she couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. I'm done being a stepping stone for him, Evelyn said, her voice low but filled with resolve. It's time I took control again. As she stared out of the window, a small sense of peace began to settle over her. It wasn't the calm of resignation, but of determination. She had been letting her son take from her for far too long. It was time for her to take something back. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her back to the present. She pulled it out, her stomach flipping when she saw the caller ID, David. For a moment she just stared at it, then glanced at Maggie, who offered a subtle nod. Evelyn took a deep breath and answered. Hello, David. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart was racing. I need to talk to you, came his voice, already tinged with that familiar irritation. And so it began. The phone buzzed again, vibrating insistently on the kitchen counter. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment before picking it up, her thumb hovering over the green answer button. It was David. Her stomach twisted as she pressed it. Hello. David. His voice came through sharp and impatient. Mom, we need to talk. Evelyn felt a surge of anxiety, but she didn't let it show. Her grip tightened around the phone as she steeled herself. About what? There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then his voice cracked with frustration. I just saw the transactions on your account. What the hell, Mom? What did you think you were doing? Evelyn took a slow breath. She had known this conversation was coming. She had prepared for it, steeling herself for his outrage, even though a part of her had hoped it would never happen. But now that it was here, it felt almost like a physical blow. I've changed my bank account information, David, she said, her voice calm but firm. You can't access my account anymore. She could almost hear him physically recoil, his anger building like a storm. You what? His voice cracked, disbelief lacing his words. Are you serious right now? You can't just go changing things like that without telling me? What, are you trying to control me now? Evelyn felt a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or a pang of guilt, but she pushed it away. She had made her decision. She had to stand by it. I'm not trying to control you, David. I'm just protecting myself. You've been using my account without my permission. I can't trust you with my finances anymore. Come on, Mom, he snapped. That was just a couple of charges. You're overreacting. It's no big deal. She could hear his attempt to downplay it, to make it seem like nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It wasn't just a couple of charges. The money he had taken wasn't his, and it hadn't been his to spend. Evelyn's chest tightened with the weight of it all. It's not a couple of charges, David. You've been using my money for your own expenses. I trusted you, and you took advantage of that. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, Evelyn thought maybe he was processing her words. Maybe this would be the moment he would apologize, realize how wrong he was, and take responsibility for what he had done. But no. His voice came back, even sharper than before. You're being ridiculous. This is about control, isn't it? You've always had to control everything. And now, you're taking it too far. Evelyn's pulse quickened. the old hurt creeping back. But she didn't let it sway her. It's not about control. It's about trust, and I can't trust you anymore. She heard him breathing heavily, frustration and guilt bleeding into the silence. He had never been good at facing the consequences of his actions, and this was no different. I'm your son, Mom. You're supposed to help me. You owe me. I don't know why you're doing this. Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. She felt the words reverberating deep inside her, but they weren't the words of guilt she had expected. They were the words of entitlement. She had heard this before, but this time it was different. She wasn't going to apologize for setting boundaries. I've helped you enough, David, she said softly but resolutely, and I'm not going to keep enabling you. I've spent years giving and giving, and I've let you take more than your share. But not anymore. Another silence, and then David's voice came through, laced with a familiar bitterness. So, that's it? You're just going to cut me off? Just like that? I'm not cutting you off, she replied, the words coming out more easily than she expected. I'm setting boundaries. I'm not going to let you take advantage of me anymore. David's voice grew louder now, a mix of anger and disbelief. You can't be serious. You're my mother, Evelyn. I'm your only son. You owe me more than this. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat at the accusation, but she didn't let herself waver. I'm not doing this because I owe you, David. I'm doing this because I need to protect myself. I need to stop being your safety net. I've been letting you take from me for too long. Before he could respond, a new voice cut in. Soft, but firm. David, stop. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as Sarah's voice crackled through the line. She had been listening in. Evelyn hadn't even realized she had picked up the phone. Mom, Sarah said, her voice calm but pleading. Please, just listen to him. Evelyn could almost hear Sarah shifting uncomfortably in the background, her tone carrying the weight of trying to mediate between two people she loved but couldn't control. David's upset. I understand that. But, Sarah? Evelyn interrupted, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension. This isn't about his feelings anymore. This is about me. I need to take control back of my own life. David let out a harsh laugh, the sound grating in Evelyn's ears. Control, control, control. That's all you care about. You're throwing me away for some sense of power. I'm not throwing you away, David, Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. But I can't keep enabling you. Not like this. There was a long pause on the other end. David didn't say anything. Neither did Sarah. Evelyn's heart beat in her chest, heavy with the weight of her decision. She had drawn the line. She wasn't going back. I'm done, David finally said, his voice hollow. You've made your choice, and I'll make mine. The line went silent, and Evelyn felt a cold knot settle deep in her stomach. She knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. But as she set the phone down, she realized that she had just taken the first real step toward reclaiming her life. Evelyn walked through the automatic doors of the bank, her heart steady, though the storm of emotions inside her hadn't quite subsided. She was determined now, each step in the sleek, glass-lined lobby taking her closer to a decision that, though simple in its action, was monumental in its impact. The cool, polished floors reflected the overhead lights, and the quiet buzz of the bank gave her a strange sense of calm. She was here to take control. No turning back. At the front desk, the teller greeted her with a friendly smile, though Evelyn could see the familiar question in her eyes. What can I help you with today? I need to change my banking details, Evelyn said, her voice firm but calm. The teller nodded, tapping something into her computer, and gestured to the chairs in the waiting area. Please, have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. Evelyn nodded, taking a seat in one of the high-backed chairs near the window. She looked out at the bustling street, the cars passing by, the world continuing as it always did. But everything had changed for her. She had crossed a line in the sand, one that could never be uncrossed. And as she sat there, watching the world go by, a strange feeling washed over her. It wasn't fear, nor anger, but a profound sense of empowerment. She was doing this for herself. The moments passed, and she was eventually called to a private office in the back. The banker, a young woman with a professional demeanor, smiled politely as she offered Evelyn a seat. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Johnson?" Evelyn sat down, the weight of her decision pressing into her chest like a stone. She held her ground. "I need to change my account details. Everything. I also need to set up new access for a trusted person to help me manage things." The banker blinked, slightly taken aback, but quickly recovered. "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. I'll need to verify some information, and then we can proceed with updating your account." Evelyn nodded, watching the young woman's fingers move swiftly over the keyboard as she entered her information. It was a routine procedure, but for Evelyn, it felt like she was closing a chapter on a life she had once known, a life where David's presence was a constant shadow over her decisions. The transaction took longer than she expected. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft murmur of office voices surrounding her as she waited. In that moment, the seriousness of her decision settled deep in her bones. She had taken the first step. There was no turning back now. By the time the process was complete, Evelyn had a new set of account details and a fresh credit card in her hand. The old card, the one that David had used so freely, now lay forgotten in her purse. She could almost feel the weight of it, the weight of trust lost and the boundaries now firmly in place. The banker handed her a packet with her updated information, a small but powerful reminder that her world had shifted. "I've ensured that only you and your chosen contact will have access to these accounts, Mrs. Johnson," the banker said as she slid the documents across the desk. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" Evelyn smiled, feeling a strange sense of finality. "No, that's everything for today." As she stood to leave, the banker handed her a small slip of paper with her new card details and instructions on setting up secure online access. Evelyn felt the faintest sense of relief, as if the weight she had carried for so long was finally lifting, one small piece at a time. She slipped the paper into her bag and left the office, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight. But the peace she felt was fleeting. As she walked back to her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her stomach turning as she saw the caller ID. David. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. She could feel the knot in her stomach tightening again, the familiar churn of guilt that had haunted her since their last conversation. But this time, she wasn't going to let him control her emotions. She wasn't going to let him sway her. With a deep breath, Evelyn hit decline and shoved the phone back into her purse. As she sat in her car, the engine purring to life, she felt strangely calm. She was still furious at David for violating her trust, but she also felt an immense sense of pride. She had taken back her life, her finances, her future. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. But she was done being passive, done being the one who gave and gave, until there was nothing left. The next few days passed in a blur. Evelyn took a long, quiet walk each morning, enjoying the solitude, the peace she'd been missing for so long. But she knew that David was growing angrier by the day. He'd left a few voice messages on her phone, but she hadn't listened to any of them. Each message was a combination of frustration and threats, his voice rising with each passing day. Then, one evening, as she sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from David. It was from Sarah. "Mom, we need to talk. David's really upset. Please call me." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She put the phone down slowly, staring at it for a long moment. She had made her decision, but it wasn't going to be easy. And as the weight of Sarah's message settled over her, Evelyn knew that the confrontation was far from over. Evelyn stood in her living room, her hands steady as she placed the fresh credit card on the coffee table. It felt like a symbol of her new beginning, a tangible representation of her decision to reclaim her life. But now, as the minutes ticked by, the anticipation in her chest began to swell. She knew David would be here soon, and she wasn't sure how it would unfold. She had braced herself for this moment since the day she had changed her bank details, but the weight of it still hung heavy. The world outside her home was bright and peaceful, but within these walls, things were about to explode. Evelyn's phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her from her thoughts. "It's David." Taking a deep breath, Evelyn swiped to answer. "Hello, David." "I'm outside," he said, his voice flat, but the tension in it was unmistakable. There was no more pretense of calm, only fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Open the door." She pressed the phone to her ear, trying to maintain composure. "Come in, David." A few moments later, the door swung open with a force that echoed through the house. David's broad frame filled the doorway, his posture rigid with anger. His eyes, wide, bloodshot, and burning, locked onto Evelyn immediately. Without a word, he stormed inside, and Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. His presence was suffocating, the weight of his anger filling the room like a storm cloud. "You really did it," David spat, his voice thick with disbelief and rage. "You really changed everything without even telling me." Evelyn stayed seated, her hands clasped together in her lap. She met his gaze steadily, unwilling to look away. "I had to, David," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've taken advantage of my trust for too long. I can't let you keep using my finances." He let out a harsh laugh, but it held no humor. "So, this is how it is now? You're cutting me off? After everything I've done for you?" His fists clenched at his sides, his breathing shallow and fast. "I'm your son, Evelyn. Your son. You're supposed to help me, not shut me out like some stranger." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she kept her voice even. "I have helped you, David. I've helped you for years, and it's never been enough. You've taken more than your fair share." His face reddened, his anger growing by the second. "More than my fair share?" He stepped forward, the rage in his eyes like a fire that couldn't be put out. "You've always had control over everything. Over me, over Dad, over everything. And now you're doing this to punish me." Evelyn stood up slowly, feeling the weight of his words in her chest, but refusing to let them break her resolve. "This isn't punishment, David. This is protection. I can't keep letting you use me as your safety net, especially when you are not willing to take responsibility for your actions." He took a step closer, his face inches from hers, his voice low but filled with venom. "You're selfish, Evelyn. You're manipulating me. You always have. You think I don't see it? You think I don't know how you twist things to make me feel like the bad guy? You've been doing it my whole life." Evelyn's heart beat faster, a flicker of doubt passing through her. Was she really the one at fault? But then she remembered the empty bank statements, the money disappearing without a trace, the lies. She felt the guilt and the manipulation, the years of letting David walk all over her, flood back into her. "No, this is the right choice. I am not the villain here." She took a breath, her voice steady despite the storm raging in front of her. "You've crossed a line, David. This isn't about control. It's about respect. And you've lost that. I can't keep enabling you, especially when you don't take responsibility for your actions." David's face twisted, his anger making his features almost unrecognizable. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair as he paced, his voice rising with every word. "You're throwing me away just like Dad did. You think I don't know what this is? You think I don't see you cutting me out? This is exactly what he did to me, and you're doing the same damn thing." Evelyn flinched, the mention of her ex-husband cutting deep. The words stung more than she expected, but she pushed through it. She wasn't going to let David use her past to manipulate her any longer. "I'm not doing this to punish you," she said softly, though the weight of her words was heavy in the air. "But I'm not going to live my life for you anymore. I've given you everything and you've taken it all. Now, it's my turn to live for myself." As David's anger swelled to a boiling point, a new voice broke through the tension in the room. "David, calm down," Sarah said, stepping into the living room. Her expression caught between concern and frustration. "This isn't helping." David turned on her, his eyes flashing with anger. "Don't start with me, Sarah. She's doing this to me. You see that, don't you?" Sarah hesitated, casting a quick glance at Evelyn before turning back to her husband. "I'm just saying, we need to think about this. It's not black and white. There's a reason she did this." Evelyn watched as Sarah's gaze shifted, her loyalties clearly divided. It was a quiet betrayal, but it stung just as much as David's anger. She had hoped Sarah would be on her side, but she could see the guilt that held her back. David's frustration only grew. "Oh, great. Now even you're taking her side?" His voice was raw with pain and rage. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as David's words echoed through the room. The sense of entitlement, the manipulation, the anger, it had all gone too far. She had tried to help him. She had done everything she could. But now, as she watched the tears in his eyes, the venom in his words, she realized something deep inside her. David was never going to change. "Mom," David said, his voice breaking as he stepped back. "Why are you doing this to me?" Evelyn paused, feeling the weight of the question settle in her chest. The truth was simple: because I have to. And with that, the silence between them seemed to stretch on forever. The house was quieter than it had been in weeks. The echo of David's angry footsteps had long faded, leaving behind a silence that felt both suffocating and strangely comforting. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the late afternoon sunlight stream through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The streets outside were peaceful, but inside her heart, there was a storm still stirring, one of uncertainty and regret. She had made the decision, she knew that. But the weight of it was still pressing down on her, a constant reminder of the life she had just untangled herself from. Is this the right thing? The question looped through her mind like a refrain she couldn't shake, each thought punctuated by the haunting echoes of David's words. "You're throwing me away, just like Dad did." Evelyn's hand clenched around the edge of the windowsill, her fingernails digging into the wood. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the sunlight fill her face, trying to quiet the whirlwind inside. It wasn't just the anger or the betrayal. It was the realization that she had been giving away pieces of herself for years, always for David, always for others. It wasn't until she had stopped, until she had made the choice to draw a line, that she saw it so clearly. For so long, her identity had been wrapped up in what others needed from her, from David's expectations, from the subtle demands of her ex-husband, from the roles she'd played in their lives. But when had she last asked herself what she needed? When had she last done something for herself? It was a thought that shook her, the kind of self-awareness that came with a painful clarity. She had been giving so much of herself away that there was barely anything left. And yet, now, she was finally standing up for herself. The phone buzzed, jolting Evelyn from her thoughts. She reached for it, a twinge of unease spiraling through her as she saw the name on the screen. Maggie. "Hey, Maggie," she answered, trying to sound more at ease than she felt. "I just wanted to check in on you." Maggie's voice came through warmly, with a touch of concern. "How are you doing after everything with David?" Evelyn leaned back into the couch, sighing deeply. I'm okay. I think I'm doing the right thing, but it's harder than I thought it would be. The guilt is still there. I just keep wondering if I did the right thing by cutting him off. Maggie was quiet for a moment, and Evelyn could almost feel the weight of her friend's understanding. Eve, you've given him so much. You've supported him through so much. But you can't keep pouring from an empty cup. You have to think about yourself now. Evelyn nodded, her chest tightening. She knew Maggie was right. The struggle was in the letting go, of the expectations, of the guilt, of the feeling that somehow she was responsible for fixing everything. I know, Evelyn said softly, but it hurts. It hurts to think that I might never have the same relationship with David again. Maggie's voice softened. That might be true, but you have to do what's best for you, Eve. You've spent so much of your life caring for others. It's your time now. You deserve to live for yourself. There was a long pause, the weight of Maggie's words settling in Evelyn's heart. She felt a stirring inside her, a small flame of hope that she could learn to live for herself again. Maybe it's time to rediscover what brings me joy. A thought, so simple yet so profound, filled her mind. Painting. She hadn't picked up a brush in years, the quiet joy of creating something from nothing, the way it had once helped her express the emotions she kept buried. It was something she had abandoned long ago, when life had pulled her in too many directions. But maybe now, it was time to find it again. I think I'm going to start painting again, Evelyn said, the words feeling like a weight lifting off her shoulders. I haven't done it in so long, but I think it might help me to focus on something just for me. Maggie's voice brightened. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Eve. You've always had such a gift. It's time you gave that gift back to yourself. Evelyn smiled, the first real smile she'd had in days. Maybe I'll even join that painting group you mentioned. You know, something just for fun. Exactly, Maggie replied, her voice full of warmth. You deserve that. For the rest of the afternoon, Evelyn felt a quiet peace settling over her. She took out the old paints and brushes she'd kept tucked away in the closet for years. The familiar smell of oil paint and the feel of the brush in her hand brought a wave of nostalgia. She had missed this, the freedom, the creativity, the sense of calm it gave her. She spent hours working on the canvas, her mind quieting with each brush stroke, the swirling colors blending together in a way that felt both freeing and comforting. By the time the sun set, she had almost forgotten the world outside. David, the confrontation, the guilt, all of it seemed distant now, like shadows that were slowly being replaced by something more vibrant. As she cleaned up, the phone buzzed again, breaking the stillness of the evening. This time, it wasn't Maggie. It was Sarah. Mom, can we talk? The message was short, but Evelyn could feel the weight of it. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her thoughts swirling. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to continue finding solace in her new routine. But a larger part of her knew that the conversation with Sarah was inevitable. With a sigh, Evelyn set the phone down. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face whatever it was, on her own terms. Evelyn set the phone back down on the kitchen counter with a soft exhale. She had just spent the last few hours immersing herself in the paintbrush and canvas, a place where she could retreat from the noise of the world and just be. It felt good. Better than good, actually. It felt freeing. But the peace that had settled around her was fragile, just waiting for something to disrupt it. And then, as if on cue, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from Maggie. It was from Sarah. Mom, can we talk? I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner. Please, just let me explain. Evelyn stared at the screen, the words pulling at her in ways she hadn't expected. She had been prepared to move on, to focus on herself, to leave the past behind. But seeing Sarah's message stirred something in her, a mix of guilt, sadness, and longing for the connection that had always been there. Even if it had felt distant at times, part of her wanted to ignore it, to pretend she hadn't seen it, to keep going with her newfound independence. But another part of her, the part that still held onto some hope of reconciliation, couldn't just let it go. She stood there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Finally, she took a breath and typed a response. Okay, meet me at the cafe in an hour. When Evelyn walked into the small cafe on the corner of her street, she found Sarah already sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her posture slumped with the weight of everything unsaid. Evelyn hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and sliding into the chair across from her. Sarah's eyes flickered up to meet hers, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with the tension of all the unspoken words hanging between them. Evelyn couldn't help but notice the way Sarah looked, exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Her face was drawn as if the past few weeks had aged her somehow. I'm sorry, Mom, Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. I should have been there for you. I didn't. I didn't understand what you were going through, and I'm sorry for not supporting you sooner. Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest at the apology. It wasn't what she had expected to hear, but it was what she needed. She had been angry with Sarah for staying silent, for not standing with her when David had crossed that line. But now, seeing her daughter sitting there, vulnerable, Evelyn realized that it was never just about the money, or David, or even the betrayal. It was about the years of quiet tension, the things left unsaid between them. It's okay, Evelyn said quietly, though it wasn't really okay. Nothing had been okay for a long time. It's just hard. I had to make a choice, and I knew it was going to hurt. But I couldn't let David keep doing this. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the table, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her teacup. I get that now. I see it. David's been out of line. He's always been a little selfish, but lately it's like he thinks the world owes him something. And I get it. I really do. You can't just keep giving and never get anything back. Evelyn listened carefully, her heart aching as Sarah spoke. She could hear the frustration in her daughter's voice, but there was also a quiet sadness there, a sense of loss that hadn't been there before. He's not the same person he was, Mom. He's changed, and I don't know how to get through to him anymore. But I also don't know what to do now. You're my family, too. I don't want to lose both of you. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the world outside. The sun was setting now, casting a warm glow over the sidewalk, as if trying to make everything seem normal. But inside her, nothing felt normal anymore. I can't keep living like I have been, she said slowly. I've been giving up pieces of myself for so long, doing things because it's what I thought I should do, not because it's what I wanted to do. But I have to stop, Sarah. I have to stop letting David manipulate me into feeling guilty for setting boundaries. I'm done. I have to protect myself. Sarah's face fell, and Evelyn could see the conflict there, the fear that came with the realization that their family dynamic had shifted, perhaps permanently. But Mom, if you keep pushing him away like this, what happens next? How do you fix it if you're not even talking? Evelyn's throat tightened as she looked at her daughter. The truth was, she didn't know how to fix it. She didn't even know if she could. But one thing was certain. She couldn't keep trying to fix David while neglecting her own needs. Maybe it's not about fixing everything. Maybe it's about learning to live with the pieces that are left, even if they don't fit the way they used to. The silence stretched between them, the weight of Evelyn's words settling over them like dust. Sarah opened her mouth as if to say something, but then paused, thinking better of it. I understand, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, but I still don't want to lose you too. Evelyn's heart clenched, the enormity of the situation hitting her all at once. She wanted to promise that everything would be okay, that their family would heal and come back together. But she knew that wasn't her decision to make. It was David's. And for now, all she could do was protect herself. I'm here, Sarah, Evelyn said softly, her voice filled with quiet strength. But I can't keep losing myself in the process. I won't do that anymore. As Sarah nodded, the heaviness of the conversation hung in the air. Evelyn knew that their relationship, like everything else, would need time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking the first step toward something new, something that was hers alone. And that, for now, was enough. The weight of the decision she had made still pressed on Evelyn's chest as she stepped into the small law office, the familiar scent of paper and leather wrapping around her. The walls were lined with books, their spines worn from years of use. Daniel Reese's office was neat and orderly, with a few personal touches that made it feel less sterile. A framed photo of a beach at sunset, a potted plant near the window. It was a place that exuded calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned inside her. She had never wanted to involve lawyers in her personal life, had always managed things herself, believing that family should be able to work things out without the cold hand of legal intervention. But now, as she sat in front of Daniel's desk, she realized how foolish that had been. You don't make the tough decisions and expect them to go unnoticed, she thought. You need to protect yourself. Evelyn, good to see you. Daniel greeted her with a warm but professional smile as he stepped into the room. His suit was sharp, his demeanor calm and reassuring, the kind of person you trusted in difficult situations. He closed the door behind him and sat across from her, his gaze already assessing, waiting for her to speak. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Evelyn said, her voice steady but tired. Of course, Daniel replied. You mentioned you wanted to discuss your financial situation. Is this about your son? Evelyn nodded, her fingers tapping nervously against the armrest of her chair. Yes, it's about David. I've changed my banking details, but I'm worried about what he might do next. I need to make sure I'm protected, legally. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You're right to be cautious. You are well within your rights to restrict his access to your finances. Legally speaking, he has no claim to your accounts unless you've given him authorization. If he's been using your accounts without permission, that's a clear violation of your trust. You don't owe him any further access. Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her at his words, but also a tinge of sadness. It was still hard to admit that David had crossed that line, had used her in ways she'd never imagined. The guilt, the confusion, it all swirled inside her. But at least, she thought, she was finally taking control. Thank you, she said, her voice softer. That's what I needed to hear. Daniel continued, pulling out a file from his desk. It's important, though, that we also review your estate plan. If you haven't already, we should ensure that your wishes are clearly outlined and legally binding. You want to make sure that, in the event of anything happening, there are no questions about what you want for yourself and your assets. Evelyn nodded, her mind racing as Daniel spoke. She'd never liked to think about the possibility of her own mortality, but now, with everything changing in her life, she realized it was necessary. She had spent so many years caring for everyone else that she'd never considered what would happen if she didn't have control anymore. I've put everything into place for David and Sarah before, but I never thought about what would happen if something went wrong, or if I needed to take a step back, she said quietly. That's understandable, Daniel replied, scribbling a few notes on a notepad. But it's time to make sure that if you ever need to make a decision for yourself, there's a clear directive in place. Your estate, your power of attorney, everything. We can set that up for you. A sense of finality settled into Evelyn's bones. She wasn't just protecting her finances, she was protecting her future, her independence. I'd like to make sure that everything is in order, Daniel, and I want to appoint someone trustworthy to make decisions for me if I'm ever unable to. Daniel nodded, pulling out another sheet of paper. We can draw up a power of attorney document. It's important that whoever you choose to assign has your best interests at heart, someone you trust completely. Evelyn's mind flickered to Maggie. Maggie had always been there for her, the steady hand in the storm. She could trust her. Maggie, with her wisdom, her calm demeanor. It felt right. But even as the thought settled in her mind, doubt flickered. What if it all went wrong? What if David tried to contest it? I think I know who I'd want to choose, Evelyn said, hesitating for a moment before speaking. But I'm worried. I don't want to make things harder. I don't want David to feel like I'm cutting him out entirely. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes kind but firm. Evelyn, this isn't about cutting him out. This is about you taking control of your life again. You can't keep living in fear of what he might do next. If David is going to respect your boundaries, he has to understand that your decisions are final. And if you need someone to make sure those decisions are honored, that's your right. Evelyn exhaled deeply, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Scared that if I do this, I'll lose him for good. I've always been there for him, always given him what he wanted. But now, I don't know if he'll ever forgive me. Daniel looked at her with quiet understanding. It's a tough decision, but the longer you delay, the harder it will be to keep your peace. You've made a choice for yourself, and that's something no one can take away from you. Evelyn nodded, the path ahead still uncertain, but clearer now. She wasn't just protecting her finances, she was protecting herself, her voice, her rights, her future. And as the weight of that realization sank in, she felt something shift deep within her, a quiet, steady strength. Let's move forward with it, she said finally, her voice unwavering. I'll make sure everything is in place. I need to do this. Daniel smiled, a reassuring professional smile. We'll get it all sorted, Evelyn. You've got this. As she walked out of the office, the cool breeze of the late afternoon hit her face, a reminder that there was still a world outside her own small corner. But for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it on her own terms. And that was the beginning of something new. The holidays were approaching, and the air outside was growing crisp with the first hints of winter. Evelyn stood by the window of her home, watching as the wind stirred the fallen leaves in the yard. The festive decorations on her neighbor's home stood in stark contrast to the emptiness she felt about this time of year. It was always supposed to be a season of togetherness, family dinners, laughter echoing through the house. But this year, there would be none of that. David and Sarah wouldn't be there, and Evelyn was still adjusting to the quiet that came with that absence. She'd grown accustomed to their presence, even when things were strained. It felt strange, unsettling, to think of a holiday without them. Yet, as the days passed, the initial sting of loneliness was slowly being replaced with something unexpected, a feeling of liberation. The weight of their expectations, the constant worry about whether she was doing enough, was gone. She had made the choice to live for herself, and as the holiday season drew nearer, she was beginning to savor the calm of her own company. Maggie's picking me up in 20 minutes, Evelyn said to herself as she finished the last of her tea, the warm liquid still comforting her despite the cool air creeping through the house. She wasn't going to spend this holiday alone, not when she had friends who truly cared about her. Maggie, who had been her rock through all the turmoil, had insisted they celebrate together this year. As the doorbell rang, Evelyn quickly stood, smoothing down the hem of her sweater, a feeling of anticipation buzzing in her chest. She opened the door to find Maggie standing there, a wide grin on her face. "Ready for some holiday cheer?" Maggie asked, her cheeks flushed from the cold air, a basket of homemade bread in her hands. Evelyn laughed, feeling the first true sense of holiday spirit that she had in weeks. "I think I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Let's go." The evening unfolded with a warmth that Evelyn hadn't expected. Maggie had invited a few other close friends, each of them older women who, like Maggie, had seen their share of life's highs and lows. Together, they shared stories over dinner, their laughter filling the room, the air thick with the smell of roasted vegetables, turkey, and freshly baked bread. It wasn't the grand holiday gatherings of years past, but it was better, simpler, more genuine. As the night wore on, Evelyn felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. There were no arguments, no manipulations, no undercurrents of tension that she had spent so much time trying to navigate. It was just good food, good company, and genuine joy. Maggie caught her eye across the table, a knowing look passing between them. There was no need for words. Maggie had always been able to read her. It was in these quiet moments, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was, not what she could do for them, that Evelyn realized the relationships that truly mattered were the ones built on respect, not obligation. Later, as they cleaned up the dishes together, Evelyn found herself smiling. The holidays had once felt like an obligation to please everyone, but now they felt like a celebration of herself, of the woman she was becoming. There would be no more silent sacrifices, no more pretending to be someone she wasn't to keep the peace. As they sat down to dessert, a rich apple pie with whipped cream, Evelyn realized something. For the first time in years, she was free. She was no longer weighed down by the expectations of others. She wasn't living for David's approval or anyone else's. She was living for herself. A few days later, while Maggie and the others gathered around the table, Evelyn's mind drifted to something she'd always dreamed of but never thought she'd make happen: travel. She had spent so many years putting off the things she wanted, thinking there would always be time later. But now, she was starting to realize that there might not be a later if she didn't take action now. There was a whole world out there, just waiting for her to explore it. The thought filled her with excitement and possibility. She pulled out her phone and started browsing for destinations. Somewhere warm, with clear blue skies and an endless horizon. Somewhere that could become a fresh start for her. "Maggie," Evelyn said, her voice light with excitement. "What do you think about taking a trip in the new year? Somewhere tropical, maybe? I've always wanted to go." Maggie raised an eyebrow, a teasing grin on her face. "I think you're onto something, Eve. It sounds like exactly what you need." Evelyn smiled, her heart lifting with the realization that there was still so much of life ahead of her. She didn't have to let David's choices or her past define her future. She could shape it however she wanted, and that thought brought her a sense of liberation she hadn't known in years. As they finished their pie and the conversation turned to travel plans, Evelyn made a promise to herself. She wouldn't let the fear of losing David, or anyone, keep her from living her life. David's absence would hurt, but it would not break her. She had given enough of herself to others. Now it was time to give to herself. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt a spark of hope for what the future might hold. And it was enough. Evelyn stood at the window, her eyes tracing the faint glow of the city lights in the distance. The air outside was still, the world quieting down for the night. It was the first real break she'd had since the holidays, and the peace was almost too much to bear. The silence in her home, once a balm, was now a reminder of everything that had happened. and everything that was yet to come. The phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. A single glance at the screen told her everything she needed to know. David. He had called twice earlier in the week, each time leaving a brief, regretful voicemail. She had ignored them. The pain too fresh, the wound still raw. But now, as the message from him lingered on the screen, she realized that the time had come to address what had been left unsaid. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn hit accept and pressed the phone to her ear. Hello? Mom. I I need to talk to you, in person. I've been thinking a lot about everything. David's voice was hoarse, heavy with emotion. It wasn't the angry, demanding tone she had become so familiar with. This was different. Vulnerable. Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd spent so long putting up walls between them, walls that had kept her safe from his manipulation, his sense of entitlement. But now she wondered if she was ready to tear those walls down. Okay, she said, her voice steady but cautious. Where and when? When David arrived, it was with the same tension in his shoulders. But this time, it wasn't anger that radiated from him. His face was pale, his eyes puffy from lack of sleep, as if he hadn't had peace either. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, not quite meeting her gaze. Evelyn motioned to the living room, and they both sat down in the quiet space. The air between them was thick with years of unspoken words, yet neither knew quite where to begin. I'm sorry, Mom, David said quietly, his voice cracking. I was wrong. I overreacted. I know I hurt you. I didn't think it through, but I was angry and scared. Evelyn's eyes softened, though she held her ground. Anger is an easy thing to hide behind, David. But that doesn't make it right. He nodded, his hands clenched in his lap as if trying to hold on to something steady. I know. I felt like you were pushing me out. Like you didn't want me around anymore. You've always been there for me no matter what. And when you cut me off, it hit me harder than I expected. But I didn't know how to handle it. I've been acting like a child. The admission hung in the air between them. Evelyn had expected to hear the same defensiveness, the same blame shifting that had been the hallmark of their relationship for years. But this was different. For the first time in a long while, David seemed to be owning up to his mistakes, his insecurities. I don't know what happened to me, Mom, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I guess I've been so used to getting everything I wanted from you that I didn't even realize how unfair I was being. My whole life, you've taken care of me, and I guess I thought that would always be the way it was. But that's not fair to you. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long trying to understand him, trying to fix what was broken between them. But now, as he sat in front of her, vulnerable and regretful, she realized that he wasn't the only one who had been holding on to the past. She had too. You're right, she said quietly, her voice steady but firm. You've taken from me, David. You've taken my trust, my peace, my sense of security, and I let you. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was helping you, but what I was really doing was enabling you, and that has to stop. David looked down, guilt washing over his face. I understand that now. I really do. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to deal with everything, with my own insecurities. I was afraid if I didn't act like I deserved it, you'd stop loving me, that you'd leave me like Dad did. The words hit Evelyn like a cold gust of wind. Dad. She had known that David's feelings about his father ran deep, but hearing it like this, hearing the raw pain in his voice, made something inside her shift. She hadn't realized how much of his anger was rooted in that abandonment. But that didn't excuse his behavior. Not anymore. I don't want to lose you, Mom, David added, his voice breaking. I know I messed up. but I want to make things right. I just need you to trust me again." Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything between them. She had to make it clear, once and for all, that respect and trust were the foundation of any relationship, family included. "I don't know if I can trust you right now, David, but I will try, and you have to try too. But this won't happen overnight. Trust has to be earned. You have to show me that you can change, and you have to accept that I can't keep living to fix your mistakes." David nodded, his eyes full of regret. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I'll prove it." Evelyn felt a flicker of hope, but she didn't let herself get carried away. She wasn't ready to fully open the door again, not yet. There was still so much work to be done, on both sides. "I'm willing to try, David," she said softly, "but under one condition: boundaries. We'll work through this, but we do it on my terms." David's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn saw the glimmer of the son she had once known, the one who had trusted her, who had needed her. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll respect that." Evelyn felt the weight of the decision settle within her. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road she was willing to walk. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone in the journey. The silence in Evelyn's home felt heavier now, a steady hum of tension that seemed to cling to the air. After David had left, the words they had shared swirled in her mind like a storm: hope, anger, vulnerability. She had listened to his apology, his confession, and for the first time in years, she had heard the raw honesty in his voice. But as she sat alone in the stillness of the living room, she knew that things could never go back to the way they were. She couldn't just erase the hurt, the betrayal, or the years of sacrifices she had made at his expense. She had given so much of herself, only to watch him take without ever truly understanding the weight of what he was asking for. No more, Evelyn thought, clenching her fists in her lap. "I have to protect myself now." The conversation with David had left a sting, not from his anger but from the realization that he would always see her through a lens of need and expectation, and that wasn't fair to either of them anymore. As the days passed, Evelyn made a decision. She would limit her interactions with him. There would be no more impromptu visits, no more dropping everything to fix his problems. She couldn't afford to keep sacrificing her emotional peace, especially when he wasn't yet ready to prove he could respect the boundaries she was trying to set. The sadness that settled over her was hard to shake. There was an ache in her chest whenever she thought of David, of the son she had once known, of the relationship that might never fully heal. She missed the way things used to be, the simple times when he had been a boy and the world had seemed simpler, freer. But now, she had to face the reality that those days were gone. And though it hurt, Evelyn knew she couldn't keep living in the past. The phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with Maggie's name. Evelyn smiled faintly before answering. "You okay, Eve?" Maggie's voice was soft, the concern in her words something Evelyn had come to rely on. "I'm okay," Evelyn replied, though the weariness in her voice betrayed her. "It's just harder than I thought. I want to believe David can change, but I know I can't keep letting him back in like I used to." Maggie was quiet for a moment, and Evelyn could almost hear her friend thinking, choosing her words carefully. "It's okay to be cautious, Eve. You don't have to rush into anything. Healing takes time, and you have to put yourself first now. It's not easy, but it's necessary." Evelyn nodded, though Maggie couldn't see it. She appreciated the reassurance, but part of her still felt guilty for the decision she had made. She wanted to believe that if she just gave David enough time, he would realize the weight of his actions. But the truth was, he had to be the one to show up, not her. She couldn't keep doing the work for him. As the conversation wound down, Evelyn made a mental note to keep moving forward. She wasn't going to let this define her life. She needed to focus on her own happiness, on the things that brought her joy without anyone else's demands attached. The next morning, Evelyn sat down at her kitchen table with a journal, a new habit she had picked up over the past few weeks. She had never been one for journaling, but the writing helped clear her mind, helped her process the emotions she was still learning to navigate. It was a space where she didn't have to be anyone's caregiver, anyone's fixer. It was just her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. Today, she wrote about the conversation with David. She wrote about her pain, but also about the strength she had found in herself. This is the beginning of something new, she thought as she scribbled down the words. A life for me, on my terms. She wrote about the friendships she had neglected, the hobbies she had abandoned, the things that made her feel alive. It was time to rediscover those parts of herself. Later that afternoon, Evelyn walked into town with a purpose. There was a small community center just a few blocks from her home, and she had heard about a local book club that met once a week. Books had always been a passion of hers. Stories, characters, worlds where she could lose herself. It was something she had put aside when life had gotten too busy, too demanding. But now, with all the time she had, it felt like the perfect opportunity to step into something new. As she walked through the doors of the community center, she was greeted by a group of women who seemed friendly enough. They were laughing, chatting about the latest novel they had read, and for the first time in a while, Evelyn felt a spark of excitement. She hadn't realized how much she missed being part of something just for her. I'm Evelyn, she said with a smile, introducing herself to the group. I'd love to join, if you'll have me. The women smiled back, and one of them, an older woman with kind eyes, patted the empty chair beside her. Of course, we're always happy to have new members. As the conversation continued, Evelyn felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was doing something for herself. She was starting to rebuild. She wasn't letting David or anyone define her future. She was finding her own way, and the path felt clearer with every step. As the meeting wrapped up, Evelyn walked out of the community center with a smile on her face, the weight in her chest a little lighter. She still didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was walking toward something good. The future was hers, and that was enough. The doorbell rang, an unwelcome sound, but one Evelyn had been expecting. She took a steadying breath before walking across the room. When she opened the door, there he stood, David. His face was set in that familiar, determined expression, but there was a tiredness to him that hadn't been there before. He had always carried an air of entitlement, as if he were entitled to her time and energy. But today, there was something different. Maybe it was the rawness in his eyes, or maybe it was just the weight of the last few weeks settling between them. Mom, David began, his voice tinged with frustration. We need to talk. Evelyn's heart sank, but she stood firm. We've already talked, David. We've had this conversation. David pushed past her gently, not waiting for an invitation to enter. No, we haven't, he insisted, his voice rising with a thin edge of anger. You've been keeping me at arm's length, and I don't understand why. I've apologized, and I'm trying to make it right. So why are you still treating me like this? Evelyn closed the door behind him, her back to it as she stood tall. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. Because trust takes time to rebuild, she replied, her tone steady. You can't just expect things to go back to the way they were because you're sorry now. You've hurt me, David. And I need time to process that. David's jaw tightened as he took a step closer, his frustration bubbling over. What more do you want from me? I've admitted I was wrong. I've said I'm sorry. What else is there? Why are you holding me at a distance? I need you, Mom. I'm your son. Evelyn's chest tightened at the raw emotion in his voice, but she refused to let it sway her. I don't want you to need me, David. I want you to stand on your own 2 feet. I want you to take responsibility for your actions, not just apologize because you think it'll make everything go away. His face reddened, and the guilt in his eyes twisted into something darker, a frustration she hadn't seen before. You've always been there for me, Mom. You've always given me everything, and now you're just pushing me away. What do you think that does to me? What do you think it does to us? David, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. I've always given you what you needed. I've sacrificed everything for you. My time, my energy, my peace. But you've never respected the boundaries I set. You've always taken without giving anything in return. And I'm done with that. I'm not going to let you manipulate me into giving you more than I have left to give. He took a step back, his face twisting in disbelief. Manipulate you? He scoffed, his voice dripping with resentment. Is that what you think this is? I was trying to make things right. I was trying to fix what I messed up, and all you're doing is pushing me away like I'm some kind of burden. Evelyn's pulse quickened, the familiar sting of guilt creeping in. She wanted so badly to believe that this time, would be different. But the truth was, he hadn't changed. He was still asking for more from her, just in a different way. She couldn't keep enabling him. I don't need to fix you, David. You need to fix yourself, she said, her voice low but firm. I'm done being the one who carries all the weight. Your actions have consequences, and those consequences are that I won't accept disrespect in my life anymore. The words hung in the air between them like a taut rope, ready to snap. David's face darkened, and he took another step back, his fists clenched at his sides. The anger in his eyes was undeniable, but so was the desperation beneath it. Fine, he spat, his voice a low growl. I get it. You've made your choice. But don't come crying to me when you realize that you pushed me away too far. You're going to regret this, Mom. Evelyn's heart twisted. But she held her ground. No, David. I'm not going to regret this. I'm doing what I need to do for myself. I'm doing this because I love you, and because I know you need to learn how to stand on your own. You need to understand that I'm not here to fix your problems anymore. I can't be the one to do that. David stood there, shaking with anger and something else, something deeper, more fragile. For a moment, Evelyn almost thought he might collapse. But he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Evelyn stood frozen for a long time after he left, the silence in the house almost deafening. Her body ached with the weight of it all. She had just said goodbye to something she had spent her whole life trying to salvage, her relationship with her son. But deep down, she knew it was the right choice. She had set a boundary, and it had to be respected, even if it meant losing him for a while. Later, as she sat on the couch, her phone buzzed again. It was Maggie. Eve, are you okay? Maggie's voice was soft but concerned, her understanding clear even through the screen. I'm okay, Evelyn replied, though her voice cracked slightly. I did what I had to do. It doesn't feel good, but I know it's the right choice. I can't keep giving him everything. I can't keep letting him take more than he deserves. Maggie's voice was filled with warmth, the kind of reassurance Evelyn had needed. You made the right decision. It's going to hurt, but it's for the best. You've got to protect your peace. Evelyn closed her eyes, leaning back into the couch. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of calm, of relief. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had drawn the line, and now she would see if David would ever learn to respect it. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow through the windows as Evelyn sat in the stillness of her living room. The familiar hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, the silence in the house now an old companion. Her eyes scanned the empty space around her. Furniture that had been arranged, rearranged, and lived in for years. Yet somehow, it all felt foreign now. The house that had once been filled with noise, tension, and the weight of family obligations was now just a shell, echoing only her own thoughts. Evelyn hadn't realized how heavy the past had been until it was gone. The constant worry about David, the endless emotional labor, the guilt that accompanied every decision, it had all been so consuming. But now, as she sat alone, reflecting on the choices she had made, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: freedom. She closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. What now? She wondered. She had spent so many years defining herself by what others needed, but now it was her turn. It wasn't a question of healing anymore. It was about stepping into a life that belonged entirely to her. And that life, she realized, couldn't happen here. Evelyn had always known that the house, the neighborhood, the city, these places held too many memories, too much history. And while history had shaped her, it didn't have to define her future. It was time to let go. She was ready to move on. The thought of moving to a new city had been a fleeting one at first, but it had grown stronger over the past few weeks. Austin had been home for years, but it also felt like a place where everything reminded her of what she'd lost. David, the never-ending cycles of disappointment, the emotional toll. There were too many ghosts here, too many remnants of a life that no longer served her. It's time for a fresh start, she told herself, somewhere where I'm not just the person everyone expects me to be. The phone on the counter buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down at it, seeing Daniel's name. She had been meaning to speak with him about her plans, to ensure everything was set for her future. She answered with a deep breath, bracing herself for another life-altering conversation. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Evelyn," he greeted her warmly. "I've been thinking about our last conversation. You mentioned needing a change." She paused, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her coffee mug. "I've made a decision, Daniel. I think I need to leave Austin. I'm ready to move on, start over somewhere new." There was a long pause on the other end, then Daniel's voice came through, steady and understanding. "I think that's a wise decision, Evelyn. You've been carrying so much weight for so long. A fresh start can be exactly what you need. You've earned it." Evelyn felt a wave of relief at his words. The decision hadn't been easy, but she knew it was the right one. For the first time in a long time, she felt as if she were in control of her life. "I want to make sure everything is in order. My finances, my estate. I want to ensure that I'm securing my future, and that there's no unfinished business here." "I'll help you with that," Daniel replied. "We can set everything up legally. Make sure you're taken care of no matter where you go. This is about you, Evelyn. You deserve to have peace, to live for yourself." Her heart swelled with gratitude. This was it, the beginning of something new, something just for her. The next morning, Evelyn sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook, mapping out the logistics of her move. She had spent so many years considering everyone else's needs, but now she was thinking of her own. She could go anywhere, start fresh, carve out a life that was hers and hers alone. By midday, Maggie arrived, a knowing smile on her face. She had been Evelyn's sounding board through the tough decisions, and now, as the final choice was made, Maggie was there to help with the details. "I'm glad you're doing this, Eve," Maggie said as she entered the living room, her arms already filled with boxes and packing tape. "You've earned this freedom, and this new chapter. It's going to be everything you've needed." Evelyn smiled, her eyes misting slightly. "I never thought I'd be able to do this. But I'm ready. I need to do this for me." Maggie set down the boxes with a soft laugh. "It's about time. You've spent so long giving to everyone else. You deserve to have something just for you. As the two of them packed, Evelyn felt a sense of peace begin to settle within her. It wasn't just about the physical act of moving, it was about letting go. Letting go of the expectations, the guilt, the weight of the past. It was a decision she had made for her future, for her happiness. By the time the sun set, the house was nearly empty. Evelyn stood in the doorway, looking out at the city that had been both home and prison for so many years. She didn't know what the future held, what city, what place, but for the first time in her life, she didn't need to know. She was ready to embrace the unknown. "Ready?" Maggie asked, her voice full of encouragement. Evelyn turned to her with a smile. "More than ready." And as they loaded the last of her things into the car, Evelyn knew that this was it, the beginning of a new chapter. One where she lived for herself, where her happiness came first. It was time to leave the past behind and step into a future she could finally call her own. Evelyn stood at the window of her new apartment, a simple but cozy space that overlooked a quiet street lined with trees. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The air felt different here, fresher, lighter, free from the weight of old memories. This place was hers. No more shadowed corners filled with reminders of past struggles, no more tense silences that had filled her old home. Here, she could breathe, and for the first time in years, it felt like she was truly living. The transition had been jarring at first, the move from a house that had been her home for so long, the unfamiliarity of a new city. But now, after a few weeks, Evelyn was beginning to settle in. She had unpacked her boxes, hung her artwork on the walls, and placed small touches throughout the apartment that made it feel like hers. Every corner reflected a piece of who she was now, not who she had been. The more time she spent here, the more she felt the sense of peace she had been desperately seeking for so long. The first few days were spent in a mix of organizing and exploring, taking long walks through the neighborhood, finding little cafes and quiet parks, discovering places that made her feel connected to the world again. It was a small, simple life, but it was hers. There were no demands, no expectations, only the possibility of something new, something entirely her own. On one of her walks, Evelyn discovered a small bookstore tucked away on a side street, its windows fogged with the promise of old pages and hidden stories. She wandered in, feeling the familiar sense of excitement that came with being surrounded by books. The scent of paper and ink, the soft rustle of pages being turned. It was the kind of place that invited you to lose track of time, to slip into a different world. She picked up a few novels, not sure exactly what she was looking for, but knowing that reading had always been a source of comfort for her. When she got home, she set the books down on the coffee table, feeling a quiet satisfaction. This, too, was a part of her reclaiming her life. The small, quiet moments were the ones that mattered now. A few days later, Maggie visited. Evelyn had been eagerly awaiting her arrival. There was something about Maggie's presence that made everything feel right, like a reassurance that the decision she'd made to start over was the right one. The two spent the weekend together, exploring more of the city, laughing over shared memories, and sitting in the sun-filled cafe where they had shared so many conversations over the years. "This place really suits you, Eve," Maggie said, sitting back with a cup of coffee in her hand. "I can see it already. You're at peace here. I'm so proud of you." Evelyn smiled, looking around her apartment as if seeing it for the first time. "I am too. I didn't realize how much I needed to get away from the past, from all the expectations. Here, I can just be me." They spent hours talking about the changes in their lives, the things they had learned, and the ways they had both grown. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Maggie, but to herself. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was thriving. She was starting to embrace who she had become after everything. The next week, Evelyn decided to join a local book club she'd found online. It was a small group, mostly women in their 40s and 50s, who met once a month to discuss the books they had read. Evelyn had always loved books, and now she was ready to dive into something new. She walked into the cozy meeting room, greeted by a few friendly faces, and immediately felt a connection with the group. They were kind, welcoming, and shared her love for reading. It was the start of something she had missed, the feeling of belonging, of being part of a community where she could simply exist, not have to perform or give. Each week, as Evelyn ventured further into this new life, she felt herself becoming more grounded. She took time for herself, cooking meals she enjoyed, spending quiet evenings with a book or a journal, and reconnecting with the things that had once brought her joy. She didn't feel the need to rush or seek validation from anyone. For the first time, she was living for herself, not because anyone else expected her to. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked home from a meeting with the book club, the sun beginning to set in a soft blaze of pinks and oranges, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had made the right decision. The move had been difficult, but it had opened the door to possibilities she had never dared to dream of. There was a freedom in not being tied to the past, in knowing that she could define her future on her own terms. At home, she sat by the window, looking out at the city that had slowly become a part of her new life. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that there would be challenges ahead, that the scars of the past would never fully disappear. But for now, for this moment, Evelyn felt truly at peace. She was free. Free from the weight of old expectations, free from the emotional baggage that had once bound her. And as she breathed in the fresh air of her new life, Evelyn realized that she was no longer just surviving, she was living. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Evelyn woke up to the soft golden light streaming through her bedroom window. It was another quiet morning in her new life. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her mug with a contented sigh. The city outside was waking up, but here, in her apartment, everything felt still and purposeful. There was no rush, no expectations pulling at her. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt truly at peace. Since her move, Evelyn had embraced the rhythm of a new, simpler life. There was no chaos, no emotional tug-of-war. She spent her days exploring her neighborhood, making new connections, and rediscovering herself in the quiet, everyday moments. The weight of her past, David, the years of guilt and sacrifice, had faded into the background, replaced by the clarity and calm of living for herself. One of the most unexpected but fulfilling changes was the job she'd taken at the local library. It was a small, community-run space, quiet and welcoming, just like the city itself. Evelyn had always loved books, the escape they offered, the way they let her explore new worlds. But now, working in the library felt like something deeper. It was more than a job, it was a calling. Being surrounded by stories, by words, by the peace of a library all day long filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. She could feel the pieces of herself that had been dormant for years, slowly coming back to life. The other staff members were kind and welcoming, making it easy for Evelyn to fall into the rhythm of her new routine. Every morning, she opened the library doors and stepped into her sanctuary, shelving books, helping visitors, and organizing new arrivals. It felt good to be doing something that mattered, not because anyone else expected it, but because it fulfilled her. Each day, the joy she felt in the library grew stronger, and it was as if she was finally starting to live the life she had always dreamed of. One filled with meaning, not dictated by obligation. But even amidst the fulfillment of her new job and life, Evelyn couldn't fully silence the echoes of her past. One afternoon, as she was shelving a book on the top shelf, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her heart skipped. It was Emily. The name on the screen caught her off guard. Emily, her estranged daughter-in-law, had been a quiet presence in her life, a bridge between Evelyn and David, and now she was reaching out. Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Hello, Emily," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "Mom, Emily's voice cracked slightly before she composed herself. "I'm sorry for everything. For not supporting you sooner. For the way things went with David. It's just, everything feels so broken. I don't want things to be like this. Can we start over? Can we talk? I miss you." Evelyn leaned against the bookshelf, the weight of Emily's words settling deep within her. She'd never expected this. Never expected to hear an apology or a plea for reconciliation from Emily, someone who had quietly sided with David in the past. But this moment, this call, felt different. She could hear the genuine regret in Emily's voice, the pain that had been buried for too long. Yet Evelyn also knew that her journey had been about taking control of her life, not allowing the weight of others' needs to dictate her every decision. It was a delicate balance, one that would require both forgiveness and boundaries. "I've heard your apology, Emily," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. "And I appreciate it. But the truth is, we can't just go back to the way things were. I need to know that respect will be mutual this time. I can't keep sacrificing myself for a relationship that's been one-sided. If we are going to rebuild anything, it needs to be on both our terms." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Evelyn could hear Emily breathing softly, processing her words. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice tinged with understanding. "I get it. I really do. I'll respect your boundaries. I don't want to lose you. We can try again, slowly." Evelyn nodded even though Emily couldn't see it, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She wasn't sure what this would mean for her future with David or Emily, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to put herself first. "We'll take it one step at a time," Evelyn said. "But this time, I'm doing it for me. I can't keep giving without receiving." When the conversation ended, Evelyn sat quietly in the library, her fingers resting on the pages of the book she'd been holding. There was no rushing into things, no going back to old patterns. She wasn't ready to forgive completely, not yet. But for the first time, she felt like she was making the right decisions. Choices that put her well-being first. As she turned off her phone and returned to her work, Evelyn thought about the future. For so long, her life had been about repairing others, about filling gaps and mending brokenness. But now, her life was about building something new, something strong, stable, and wholly her own. Her past wouldn't define her anymore, nor would it hold her back. The future was wide open, full of promise, and it was hers for the taking. The life she had chosen was one where she didn't have to be anyone but herself. And that, she thought, is enough. The city outside Evelyn's window glowed with the promise of a new day, but inside her apartment, the stillness was thick with reflection. It had been months since her move, since her life had taken a drastic turn toward independence and self-discovery. Now, sitting by the window with a cup of tea in hand, Evelyn realized how much she had changed. She looked back on the journey that had led her here, one full of pain, of lessons learned the hard way, but also one full of triumphs. She had spent so many years living for others, carrying the emotional weight of family obligations, always putting herself last. For decades, she had let the needs of her son and the demands of her past relationships define her. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped living for everyone else. And in doing so, She had found the strength to build a life that was hers and hers alone. Her relationship with David was still fractured, but she no longer felt the suffocating pressure to fix it. She had let go of the idea that she had to sacrifice her own well-being to make others happy. The realization had been liberating. Evelyn wasn't responsible for David's happiness anymore. She wasn't responsible for anyone else's. Her responsibility was to herself, to her own happiness, to her own growth. And that was enough. As she sat there, looking out over the city, Evelyn felt a deep, calm satisfaction. She had broken free from the shackles of guilt and fear, from the toxic relationships that had once weighed her down. She had learned that she didn't need to be anyone's caretaker, anyone's emotional crutch. She had learned that boundaries weren't walls. They were shields that protected her peace, her sense of self. And in this quiet moment, Evelyn knew that she was finally free. The chains of the past, of expectations, of disappointments, no longer held her. She could breathe deeply now, unencumbered, unafraid of what the future might bring. Whatever came next, she knew she could handle it. She was strong enough, independent enough, to face it head on. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up and saw an email notification. It was a message from a foundation she had been researching, the start of something she had been considering for months, a charity for women who had suffered financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, a cause close to her heart. As she read through the email, Evelyn felt a surge of excitement, a renewed sense of purpose. This was the next step. She had been thinking about giving back for a while now, about using her own experiences to help others who had suffered the way she had. Her story wasn't unique, but it had shaped her, and she wanted to ensure that others didn't have to face their struggles alone. She could take her pain and turn it into something meaningful, something that made a difference. The idea of starting a charitable foundation gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't realized was missing until now. The thought of it was exhilarating. She could picture it already. The foundation, the women she would help, the community she would build. She could see herself using her story, her experiences, to empower other women, to help them reclaim their own lives the way she had. It would be her gift to them, her way of taking everything she had learned and sharing it with those who needed it most. Evelyn sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. She was ready, ready to give back, ready to make a difference, and ready to continue her journey with a sense of purpose that wasn't rooted in the past, but in the future. The past had taught her many lessons, but now it was time to look forward, to embrace the life she had worked so hard to create. She thought about how far she had come, how much strength she had found within herself. There was a quiet power in knowing that her life was no longer defined by the mistakes of others or by her own past disappointments. She had built her life from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let anyone take that from her again. Evelyn felt a deep peace settle within her as she hit send on the email, officially starting the foundation she had dreamed about. It was the beginning of something new, something beautiful, and she was ready for it. And as she sat there, feeling the weight of her choices, Evelyn whispered softly to herself, "I have built my life on my terms, and I will never let anyone take that from me again." For the first time in years, she could say it, and truly believe it. The future was hers, wide open and full of possibility, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms.